With my hands still under her race car, the Billionaire CEO fired me in front of sponsors. She said, "You turn wrenches," because I refused to approve a steering part with a hairline mark that could kill a driver at 165 miles per hour. I didn't beg. I walked to the inspection desk, crossed my name off the car's approval, and wrote, "Responsibility withdrawn." 20 minutes later, her famous engineer tried to enter the car for the race, and officials shut it down because the machine she cut me from was only legal with the single dad she humiliated standing behind it. Real quick, before we get to the shocking truth, let us know in the comments below where in the world you're watching from today, and hit that subscribe button to join our community. My hands were still under the nose of the number 18 when Celeste Rowan fired me. Thursday technical inspection had 40 minutes left, rain ticking against the open paddock doors, and the prototype was hanging on air jacks while I lay on cold concrete with a flashlight pressed to my cheek. I had found a faint line on the new steering yoke, right where the machine transition rolled into the mount. It was barely visible unless the light hit it sideways. In endurance racing, barely is enough to put a driver into a wall after 300 laps. I thought about Evan Rowan wrapping his hands around that wheel at midnight, when everyone was tired and the car had been vibrating for hours. Adrian Cross crouched beside the left front tire and told me it was cosmetic. His simulation showed the new yoke stronger than the old design. Ultrasonic screening had found nothing, and official scrutineering was about to close. I told him to pull the yoke and run dye penetrant anyway. 10 hours of curb strike doesn't care how pretty a model looks, I said. Adrian gave a small laugh aimed at the whole garage. The only thing delaying us, he said, is a mechanic who doesn't trust modern engineering. That was when Celeste arrived with sponsors, investors, and cameras already drifting toward our bay. She looked at the open nose, then at me sliding out from under the car with grease on my sleeve. "Noah," she said, loud enough for Grace to hear from the timing cart. "You turn wrenches." Adrian designs race cars. Stop confusing the two. My daughter was 13, with a headset around her neck and a notebook full of pit-stop math in her hand. Men who had eaten dinner at our motel table suddenly found reasons to stare at the floor. I stood up and reminded Celeste that the steering yoke, front crash mounts, cooling supports, and 2 other custom assemblies were still under supplemental declarations carrying my engineering responsibility. "If my name is on it," I said, "then my judgment comes with it." Celeste told security to remove me from the active crew and said she could replace 1 fabricator before dinner. I did not argue. I opened the compliance binder, found the unfinished event declaration, struck a line through my name, and wrote, "Responsibility withdrawn. Component inspection incomplete." Then I handed it to Dr. Priya Desai. 20 minutes later, Adrian tried submitting the number 18 under his own authority. Priya stepped into the garage lane and closed it. "You can replace Mr. Bennett," she said, "but until somebody qualified inspects every modification he was carrying responsibility for, this car is not entering the race." Celeste first treated Priya like another obstacle that would move if enough important people looked annoyed. She demanded the series accept Adrian's signature immediately. Adrian was famous, qualified, and had designed faster cars than most of us had ever touched. Priya did not flinch. She said qualification was not the question. Adrian could not certify components he had not inspected, traceability he had never reviewed, or fabrication records he had never personally accepted. My signature had never been decoration. It was the place responsibility landed when something broke. Taking over my declaration meant stripping several assemblies from the car, checking weld maps, reviewing material certifications, repeating non-destructive tests, and then putting his own name behind whatever remained installed. Adrian said he could do it overnight. Cameras caught that part, and by sunset, the paddock had turned it into a contest. brilliant European engineer versus bitter old mechanic. Celeste leaned into it. She ordered my toolbox and personal equipment, loaded outside the paddock gate, before I could finish packing it myself. Grace stood under the awning and watched mechanics carry my welding helmet past hospitality guests drinking coffee from Rowan Apex cups. "The car will race," Celeste told sponsors near the glass wall. "Nobody is indispensable." Luis stayed with the team. He came to me near the service road, eyes wet but voice low, and said his family could not survive if he followed me out. I told him to stay. It sounded generous, but Grace saw what it cost. That night, in a motel room cheap enough that the bathroom fan rattled and the race broadcast came through the wall next door, my phone rang. Adrian did not introduce himself. He only asked, "What exactly did you see on that steering yoke?" Adrian removed the steering assembly after midnight. He did not call me again until almost 2, and when he did, his voice had lost the performance in it. Under magnification, he had found the same faint line near the transition. He asked me to come back quietly and look at it before anyone else woke up. I told him no. I was not sneaking into a garage I had been publicly dragged out of, especially not so the team could pretend judgment had returned without admitting who brought it. I told him the correct process over the phone. Clean the surface completely, control the lighting, run dye penetrant, document every step, and do it under Priya's observation. If the part was clean, my pride could live with being wrong. If it was not, the driver deserved a record. By dawn, Priya was standing beside the bench when red dye bled from the machined transition in a hairline crack. Adrian stared at it longer than he needed to. After that, he stopped speaking to me like a territorial mechanic protecting old habits. He wanted to know why the previous inspection had missed it. The cracked yoke could not race. The backup was the older design, less sharp in steering feel but proven through thousands of endurance miles. Celeste ordered it installed immediately so Adrian could finish recertifying the car. While crews worked, Grace showed me a message from one of the young mechanics. Management was telling everyone the crack had been caught through normal team inspection, with no mention that I had been fired for stopping the car over it. I read it twice, then handed the phone back. Before I could decide whether anger helped anything, Priya compared the cracked yoke's serial number with the fabrication log and looked up. "This component was supposed to have been rejected 3 weeks ago," she said. "Records found the first bad decision before anyone found the person who made it. The cracked yoke had failed a preliminary surface inspection at Rowan Apex's factory 3 weeks earlier, because of an uncertain mark in the same transition I had seen under the nose. I had written a note requesting second inspection before race use, not because I knew it was cracked, but because uncertain is not the same as cleared. Somewhere between that note and the transporter leaving for Wisconsin, the component appeared in inventory marked cleared for developmental installation. Priya read the screen, then looked around the garage. The electronic clearance carried Luis Moreno's technician ID. Celeste turned on him fast. Luis had been tightening belts beside the car, with his sleeves rolled up when she ordered him away from the work stand in front of the whole crew. His face went gray in a way I had never seen at the track. He admitted using his login, but said Martin Shaw told him to change the inventory status because the replacement yoke would not arrive before the transporter left. Martin stepped forward with that calm operations voice teams use when they are trying to keep panic from becoming evidence. He said the mark had passed ultrasonic screening, and developmental installation never meant final race approval. Noah was supposed to inspect it again here, he said. That was the stop point. That sentence changed the room. The part had not been hidden from me in some clever plot. Nobody had walked into the night and chosen to gamble with a driver's hands. That almost made it worse. The system had become so schedule-hungry that a component nobody had truly cleared kept moving forward, because each person assumed the next person would stop it if necessary. Lewis thought Martin had accepted the risk. Martin thought I would catch it at the track. Adrian thought his model overruled my hesitation. Celeste thought replaceable people could be removed without removing what they quietly protected. She looked at the cracked yoke on the bench like it had betrayed her personally. Then she came to me, near the back of the garage, away from the cameras but not away from Grace, and offered to publicly reinstate me immediately. My badge back, my garage pass back, my name restored to the declaration, so the weekend could keep moving under the old shape of trust. For 1 second, I wanted it. I wanted Luis to look relieved. I wanted Grace to stop watching men carry our life out through the paddock gate, but I knew the difference between respect and panic. You don't want my judgment back, I told Celeste. You want my signature back. Then I walked away again. Being right did not pay the lease on my fabrication shop. Rowan Apex canceled my remaining contract payments before noon, arguing that I had voluntarily withdrawn technical responsibility before completing the event. The email was written in clean language by someone who had never had to decide between paying steel suppliers and buying groceries. Without that money, my shop would not survive past the race weekend. I read the notice sitting on the motel bed while Grace folded one of my work shirts into a laundry bag because she needed something to do with her hands. Dana called from Phoenix that afternoon. Grace's mother did not yell. That made it harder. She asked whether Grace should spend next semester with her because my work had become unstable again. Grace heard enough from the bathroom doorway. She did not say she wanted to leave, but she did not defend the life I had given her either. Why does every race team get to decide whether we can afford our home? She asked. I had no answer that did not sound like an excuse wearing work boots. Meanwhile, Adrian kept doing the job properly. He cleared the front crash mounts and cooling assembly after inspecting them himself, but stopped at a fabricated rear suspension bracket because the heat treatment documentation was incomplete. Celeste exploded because every new inspection exposed another place where the team had relied on my memory instead of a real process. Adrian finally told her, "You didn't employ a mechanic. You built half your compliance system around one man and then mocked him for being important." At sunrise, Priya informed Rowan Apex that unless the final bracket could be traced and approved by noon, the number 18 would miss qualifying entirely. They came to the motel just after breakfast, 3 expensive cars idling outside a room that smelled like burnt coffee and damp socks. Celeste stood in the doorway, with Adrian and Martin behind her, all of them looking like people who had slept less than they were willing to admit. They believed I might have the original heat treatment certificate for the rear suspension bracket, maybe tucked in one of my shop folders or scanned onto my old laptop. I did not. The bracket had been made by a small aerospace shop outside Rockford, the kind of supplier that answered the phone during dinner because they cared about the work. That shop had closed 6 months earlier after Rowan delayed payment long enough to starve it. Martin placed a folder on the motel desk and said if I signed that the bracket matched my original specification, Priya might accept engineering substantiation without the missing certificate. The shape was mine. The weld fixture was mine. I could recognize the bracket from 10 feet away. But recognizing a design is not the same as verifying what temperature the alloy saw in a furnace, how long it soaked, or whether anyone documented the quench. I told him no. Celeste offered enough money to save my shop, not as a bribe in her mind, but as a practical solution to a practical obstacle. I still refused. Grace lost patience after they stepped into the parking lot to make calls. She stood by the motel sink with her arms folded and asked why one sentence was worth losing the business she had grown up around. She had swept that shop floor for ice cream money, sorted fasteners into bins, and done homework beside the tubing rack while I finished late welds. I wanted to tell her children should not have to understand adult pressure. Instead, I told her the truth. Because if I sign what I don't know, then the paper is worth more than the truth. She looked at the carpet for a long time, not satisfied but listening. Adrian saved the next move. He found the shuttered supplier's former quality manager through an old purchasing chain. She lived 2 hours away and might still have archived furnace records from the closing. We drove there through rain and race traffic, Celeste in the front passenger seat saying almost nothing. The woman met us in a small kitchen with boxes stacked against one wall. Before she would open a single archive, she showed Celeste a list of names. Rowan Apex still owed her former employees $286,000, she said, and she would not help a billionaire race while the people who built its parts were still unpaid. Celeste tried the legal answer first. The debt, she said, belonged inside the supplier's bankruptcy, and the workers' claims had to move through creditors like everything else. The former quality manager did not argue law with her. She slid her phone across the kitchen table and showed messages from machinists who had lost health insurance, while Rowan's attorneys disputed invoices smaller than one race weekend's hospitality budget. One man had put off a surgery. Another was selling tools. These were the people who had machined brackets for cars that crossed finish lines under champagne lights, while their own paychecks sat trapped in paperwork. Everyone looked at me, because the furnace archive could put the number 18 back into qualifying. I could have pressured her. I could have reminded her the bracket was probably fine, that the drivers were waiting, that a whole crew had jobs on the line. I did not. Celeste stood very still, and I watched the same lesson reach her from another direction. The philosophy that pushed uncertain parts forward had also pushed unpaid people backward. Protect the schedule, preserve leverage, resolve humans later. She authorized a verified worker payment fund covering wages tied directly to Rowan parts, even after lawyers warned it would complicate bankruptcy proceedings. The quality manager opened the archive. The bracket had been properly treated, and Adrian certified it. Rowan Apex cleared technical inspection, with minutes remaining. Celeste glanced at me, like she expected defeat, because the car was legal without my signature. I told her, that was always the point. The team should be able to race safely without depending on one man. During qualifying, the number 18 shot past at 165 miles an hour. Then Evan's voice cracked over the radio. Steering vibration. Violent. Bringing it in now. Evan brought the car back shaking, and not just the car. He climbed out with his gloves still on, face pale under the helmet line, and slammed both hands on the cockpit edge. You told me it was fixed, he said to the garage, though everybody knew he meant management. Competing prototypes kept screaming down the front straight, while our crew rolled the number 18 behind screens. Adrian's first guess was wheel balance, then a curb strike flat spot. Anything ordinary enough to keep the last 24 hours from becoming the beginning of a larger failure. Luis started pulling wheels without being told, hands moving fast, eyes low. I heard the vibration described over telemetry and felt an old memory wake up. The frequency matched something we had seen months earlier during rough curb testing, back when the data was ugly but brief enough to file under development notes. I asked to see the steering column support. Celeste hesitated, then allowed me into the garage as an outside technical observer. Not an employee, not reinstated, just a man whose caution had earned temporary access. That distinction mattered to her. It mattered less to the bearing we found wearing itself wrong inside the support bracket. The grease had gone dark with metal dust, and the play was small enough to miss until somebody loaded the column the exact wrong way. The support let the steering column oscillate under one particular curb load. Not always. Not on every lap. Only when speed, steering input, and curb strike arrived together in the worst order. The cracked yoke had not been the whole problem. It had been absorbing repeated vibration created elsewhere in the system until that faint line appeared like a warning written in metal. My refusal had not merely caught one bad part. It had kept them from replacing the visible symptom and sending drivers back out with the root cause still alive. Evan stood beside Celeste while Adrian explained it. Then he admitted he had felt a smaller version of the vibration during testing weeks earlier, and told engineers it was probably tire chatter. He did not want his sister questioning whether he belonged in the car. Celeste looked at him like she had been struck by a truth she could not fire. "Why didn't you say it clearly?" she asked. Evan swallowed, still holding his helmet. "Because everyone here knows what happens to the person who becomes the reason we're late." For the first time all week, Celeste did not ask who could fix the story. She withdrew the number 18 from the next session, even though missing it could cost the team its starting position. Sponsors were at the garage doors before the tires cooled. Investors called from hospitality suites, where screens still showed other teams running, while our car sat opened like a patient in surgery. Celeste could have called it a setup issue, the kind of soft phrase racing teams use when they need truth to sound temporary. Instead, she stepped in front of the cameras and said Rowan Apex was investigating a steering system safety concern. No smile, no polished spin. The admission moved through the paddock faster than lap times. Officials immediately began asking about similar components used earlier in the season. Martin pulled Celeste aside and warned that if previous results were questioned, bonus money and sponsor renewals could vanish. More than 100 jobs were tied to that image of a fearless, competent team. I saw her almost retreat into damage control, the old reflex rising in her face. Then Evan came out of the trailer and said he would not drive again until the vibration source was proven fixed. Not improved, not managed. Proven. Celeste backed him publicly. It cost her the easy picture of the Rowan family as brave winners who trusted their own machines without blinking. Grace watched from outside the garage with her arms folded. "Why is she changing only now that someone in her family felt it?" she asked me. I looked at Evan, then at the mechanics, trying not to listen. "Sometimes people don't understand a system until it reaches somebody they love," I said. "What matters is what they do after." My phone rang before Grace could answer. It was Dana. She had filed paperwork asking that Grace live primarily with her next semester, because, she said, racing would always come before our daughter. Grace did not cry after Dana's call. She sat on the curb behind the motel with her knees pulled up, listening to race cars in the distance like thunder that never moved away. "I don't want to live in Phoenix," she said. Then, after a long minute, "But I understand why Mom thinks I should." She listed things without raising her voice. The school engineering night I missed because a gearbox cracked during warm-up. The birthday dinner I left when a transporter broke down. The weekends that turned into shop nights because a race car needed something only Dad could do. Hearing her say that phrase hurt because I had always said it with pride. Only Dad could weld that bracket. Only Dad knew that old fixture. Only Dad could hear the difference between tire chatter and steering shake. I had built my life around being indispensable and called it responsibility, while my daughter learned not to count on dinner. That truth sounded a lot like Celeste's problem, and I hated how easy it was to see once Grace said it. I told Adrian I would help diagnose the steering system, but only during fixed hours. I would not sleep inside the garage, disappear from Grace, or become the emergency answer to every missing process Rowan Apex had failed to build. Adrian accepted faster than I expected. Maybe the week had humbled him, or maybe he was tired of pretending one brilliant person could safely hold a whole car together. He split the work across systems engineers, mechanics, and younger fabricators who had mostly been waiting for permission to matter. For once, the garage did not look at me every time a number went wrong. We redesigned the support bearing and added a damper, then ran the column on a full-motion rig until the shop floor shook. The violent vibration disappeared. For about 10 minutes, people let themselves breathe. Then the rig showed a new load spike in the steering rack during simulated curb strikes. The race started in less than 24 hours. A stronger rack was available in the transporter, but installing it would change geometry, force another alignment sweep, and reopen part of technical inspection. Nobody said impossible. Nobody said easy either. Martin came in after midnight with the quiet face of a man holding a shortcut. He said they could limit steering angle electronically so the dangerous load would never occur. It would be quick, clean, and nearly invisible from outside the cockpit. Then he added the part that made Adrian stop writing. The drivers did not need to know exactly why. Martin's software limit was technically possible. That was the dangerous part. It would keep the rack from reaching the worst load, at least in the conditions they had modeled. And the car could probably make the start with nothing more dramatic than a settings change and a carefully worded note. The problem was what it would feel like to Evan, or the second driver in a real emergency. If another car spun ahead of them, or a prototype came across their nose in traffic, they might turn the wheel and find less steering authority than their hands expected at the worst second. Adrian rejected it before I did. The same man who had mocked me for wanting dye penetrant now looked at Martin and said, "We are not lying to the driver with software." That surprised the room into silence. Celeste asked whether the car could race safely with full disclosure to both drivers. I said maybe. Maybe the limit held. Maybe the rain stayed away. Maybe no one needed a correction the software refused to give. But maybe was not the standard we had spent the week bleeding toward together. Martin finally broke. He said the team could not keep choosing the most conservative answer without eventually choosing unemployment for everyone. The title sponsor could exit if the number 18 failed to start, wiping out nearly half the annual operating budget. Celeste had a legal path, drivers willing to accept some risk, and a financial reason big enough to make fear sound practical. She turned to Evan and asked if he would drive under the limit. He said yes, then looked at me. "But I want Noah to tell me whether you should let me." That was the worst kind of power, because it sounded like trust. One word from me could protect the drivers, and maybe cost dozens of families their paychecks, or protect the jobs, and let a driver strap himself into a car, carrying a risk nobody wanted to name clearly. For the first time, I felt the pressure executives kept pretending only they understood. It was not abstract anymore. It was Luis's kids, Martin's crew lists, mechanics sleeping under benches, Dana's custody papers, and Grace standing by the garage door, learning what adults do when everybody needs the answer to be cheaper than the truth. I could feel how good it would be to say good enough and let everyone breathe. I refused to make the decision alone. I brought Adrian, Priya, both drivers, lead mechanics, systems engineers, and Martin into the same room, and made every limitation get said out loud. No soft language, no strategy adjustment, no driver aid protection. Under Priya's questioning, the first crack appeared in the workaround. The steering angle limit had been modeled at dry track grip levels. Heavy rain was forecast overnight, the kind that turns curb paint slick and makes aquaplaning corrections quick and ugly. In wet traffic, a driver could need exactly the rapid steering input the software would restrict. Evan looked down at his gloves when that sentence landed. Luis had been standing near the tool cart with his arms folded tight. Finally, he said Martin had told him about the workaround hours earlier, and he had helped keep it quiet while they searched for a way to present it cleanly. His voice shook when he looked at me. "I wasn't protecting Celeste," he said. "I was protecting my kids. I wanted to forgive him because I knew what that fear tasted like. I did not. Not right there. I told him protecting children by hiding risk from somebody else's child was exactly how these systems survived." He nodded once, like he hated me for being right and needed me to be right anyway. Celeste listened without interrupting. Then she canceled the software workaround and formally withdrew the car from the race, unless the full mechanical repair could be certified before the start. Sponsor executives began termination proceedings within the hour. Phones lit up across the garage, and nobody had to ask what the news meant. Men with mortgages stepped away from workbenches to call home. Then Adrian stood over the open steering bay and said the proper rack installation could still be completed in time, but only if every mechanic worked through the night, including workers Celeste had spent years treating as replaceable. Celeste gathered the crew just before dawn, with the number 18 still torn open and rain ticking on the garage roof. She did not stand on the pit box or hide behind a microphone. She told them the truth. There was no guaranteed bonus, no promise the title sponsor would remain, and no retaliation if anyone walked away. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then one tire changer set down his coffee, pulled on gloves, and went back to the steering bay. After him came two fabricators, then Luis, then younger mechanics, who had spent years being told they were replaceable, but still knew where every washer belonged. They did not stay for Celeste. They stayed for each other, and for the drivers who would trust the car at speed. I stayed until the hour I had promised Grace, then left while the rack was still hanging loose. That walk felt wrong in my bones. For the first time, Rowan Apex had to keep functioning without me standing in the middle of it like a human plug in a leaking wall. Adrian, Priya, Luis, and two young fabricators finished the installation and documented every step. At Grace's school engineering showcase, I kept my phone face down beside her project board. She noticed. She did not praise me. She just stopped checking the door every few minutes. When I returned, I inspected the work as one member of a group, not the only man whose approval mattered. The new steering system passed load testing and scrutineering shortly before the race start. Then Priya handed me a fresh compliance declaration and said the team had chosen me as responsible signatory again. I looked at my name typed across the page and was no longer sure putting it back was the right answer. Everyone expected me to sign. The repaired car met every requirement I had demanded. The cracked yoke was gone, the bearing support redesigned, the stronger rack installed, the geometry checked, the wet weather concern answered on paper and on the rig. Signing would restore my status in one clean motion. It would prove Celeste wrong, give the paddock the headline it wanted, and make the story satisfying in the easiest way. The mechanic they fired became the man they needed. I could almost hear people telling Grace later that her father had won, as if winning meant taking back the same burden that had nearly buried us. I refused that version of victory. I told Priya the declaration had to be reorganized before my name touched it. Individual subsystem engineers needed documented responsibility for the areas they actually controlled, and an independent chief safety signatory needed to review the whole car instead of letting one man's name absorb decisions made across dozens of departments. I would sign only the steering and fabricated structure portions I had personally inspected, not the entire package, not cooling because I had once built a duct, not crash compliance because I remembered an old fixture. If Rowan Apex wanted a safety system, it had to stop mistaking my memory for one. Celeste could have pushed back. The race clock was cruel. Commentators were calling the week a public embarrassment, and the number 18 would start from the back because of everything we had missed. Sponsors wanted a clean face-saving moment. Martin wanted the binder closed before somebody found one more problem. Instead, Celeste gave up the management practice that had made one person carry responsibility for work he did not fully control. Adrian signed his systems. Priya signed her independent review. Younger engineers signed pages that used to drift toward my desk because asking Noah was faster than building process. Luis signed the mechanic verification for the rack installation with hands that shook just enough for me to notice. The car started last, while the broadcast treated us like a cautionary joke. 12 hours into the race, another team suffered a steering failure at high speed. Their driver walked away, thank God, but the silence in our garage after that replay said everything about the margin we had been arguing over. Grace was beside me when it happened, and she reached for my sleeve without looking away from the screen. Through rain, repairs, and careful stints, the number 18 climbed into podium contention by the final hours. Then, with 40 minutes left, a cooling problem appeared. Celeste could order the drivers to push for the trophy, or protect the car, and accept losing the result. She had nearly destroyed the team trying to win. Celeste came over the radio herself. Her voice was steady, but I could see her on the pit wall, with both hands gripping the rail, while the timing screen showed third place only one stop away. "Reduce pace," she told Evan. "Bring it home." Nobody cheered. Race teams are trained to chase the shiny ending, and seventh place does not look like redemption on a poster. The number 18 crossed the line seventh, rain-streaked and wounded, with cooling temps still high, and every driver alive enough to complain about the car. That was the finish we had earned, not the one a cleaner story would have wanted. The title sponsor left within a month. Several smaller partners stayed, partly because Celeste stopped pretending the week had been a misunderstanding and published the safety response in plain language. Local suppliers got paid on fixed timelines. Martin stepped away from operations after accepting responsibility for the pressure tactics and the hidden workaround. Luis remained only after formal discipline and months of rebuilding trust through ordinary behavior. Not one tearful apology near a toolbox. I did not forgive him all at once. I watched him tell uncomfortable truths, when staying quiet would have helped him, and trust came back like a part machined slowly to fit. Adrian stayed too. He stopped floating above fabricators, like clean theory had nothing to learn from dirty hands. He earned respect by standing beside younger mechanics at inspection benches, asking what they saw before telling them what the model said. Celeste created protected stop-work authority across the team, and bonuses were rewritten so nobody got rewarded for making safety delays disappear. I returned under a narrower role: senior fabrication and structural safety lead, fixed race travel, trained deputies, and no expectation that every important decision waited for me. Grace's school calendar hangs on the inside of my tool cabinet beside the race schedule. When those two papers disagree now, the race schedule is not automatically the one that wins. Months later, before another major event, a rookie mechanic stopped the entire inspection line over a questionable weld. He was barely old enough to rent a car, and the old Rowan Apex would have asked whether he was sure enough to embarrass everyone. Celeste walked over, looked at the weld, and said, "Good catch. What do you need?" Nobody asked how old he was. Nobody said he just turned wrenches. They cleared a bench, brought in lighting, and let the evidence speak before the schedule did. The old declaration with my crossed-out name is framed inside the fabrication shop, not as proof that I held the car hostage, and not as a trophy over Celeste. It hangs beside the new responsibility map, the one with names spread across systems instead of stacked on one man's shoulders. Celeste thought firing the mechanic would remove the problem. Instead, she learned the car had only been legal because somebody ordinary was willing to put his name behind it. I learned something too, and it mattered more at home than at the track. The goal was never to become irreplaceable. It was to build a team where nobody had to risk being fired just to keep their name off something unsafe.